This particular budget message was supposed to have been delivered last month. However, because of the uncertainty of the outcome of the gubernatorial election and the delay that caused in forming a cabinet for Governor Kean, the budget message was put off until this date, March the 15th. Today's speech is rather anticlimactic, as word of the governor's $6.4 billion budget was leaked early last week. The governor briefed newspaper editors on the budget on Monday night in what he thought was an off-the-record meeting. However, one of the papers published some of the details from that meeting, and the details of the budget were noted. That was much to the chagrin, incidentally, of both Democrats and Republicans, who felt they should have been briefed first. And just before this particular budget session, Christopher Jackman, the former Speaker of the Assembly, rose to say that he was not happy about receiving the budget, quote, 5 minutes before the governor comes in here. We should have had that budget no later than last Saturday. So for many members of the legislature, today is the first chance that they've had to get a detailed look at the budget. In his $6.4 billion program, Kean is proposing a 10.9% increase over last year's budget. Now, it should also be pointed out that much of the budget that the governor is dealing with this year are leftover items from Governor Burns' budget. Kean said his administration faced a budget shortfall of $527 million from the previous administration. And in addition to that, the governor is proposing $202 million worth of new programs. Right now, everyone is joining to pledge allegiance to the flag. Let's go to the floor.
Please sit. We'll have an invocation upon the convening of the joint session.
Invocation, a few other items that should be brought out in the governor's message. As I told you before, Kean faced a $527 million shortfall from the Byrne administration. He's proposing $202 million worth of new programs. That means Kean is having to handle what he calls the $730 million problem. Senate President Carmen Orecchio.
I recognize the senator from Atlantic County, Senate Majority Leader Stephen Persky.
President, I move that the joint session of the 200th legislature be now come to order.
Senator Persky
I
just moved
recognize
that the joint legislative session
County
come to order, paving the way for the governor's entrance to deliver his budget message.
Those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. I'm advised by the Secretary of State and the Clerk of the General Assembly that a quorum is present at this joint session of the 200th Legislature. At this time, if you will please stand, we'll now have invocation delivered by Monsignor Edward B. Lucid, pastor of St. Mary's Parish, Gloucester City, New Jersey.
Let us bow our heads and ask for God's blessing. Almighty God, our Creator, our Provider, eternal wisdom, we ask your divine presence with us today at this very important joint session of the legislature of our state with our governor in this year of 1982. Oh God, you have blessed our state with much natural beauty and abundant resources. Our mountains and lakes, our great rivers and harbors, our seashore with the greatest beaches in the world, our rich farmlands that have won us the name of the Garden State of the nation, a healthy climate, a vast industrial complex manufacturing for the world. We count our blessings and we thank you, Lord, for your goodness and generosity to us. We need your guidance now, for we are living in difficult times, even as our country and the whole world is in difficulty. Our country, our state, are in economic trouble and beset by moral chaos. We must confess our sins against your natural gifts to us, our pollution of our waterways and air, our contamination of the good earth, our wasting our natural resources in our greediness and dishonesty. This has led us to business stagnation, unemployment, rising debt and inflation, unwillingness to pay our debts, and we have coined the phrase to excuse ourselves, no fault. It is our fault. We must confess our sin. Each one of us wants more than our share, and we want someone else preferably generations yet unborn, to pay our bills for us. Help us, Lord, to be honest with you and honest with ourselves. As the representatives of our people, the legislature needs your guiding wisdom to meet these needs, the needs of our older people, our working people in their unemployment, our business people in their tight money crunch, our younger people to get a start in the face of impossible inflation. We ask you, Almighty God, to guide our representatives to act for the best interests of all. Help our people to be understanding and tolerant when much has to be left undone. Help us all to work together, shoulder to shoulder, governor, legislator, and people, that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.
And with that invocation, the way is now paved for the entrance of Governor Thomas Kean to deliver his budget message. The governor, incidentally, has been waiting about 5 or 6 minutes in his outer office, waiting for this moment to come in and address this joint session of the legislature. He's been waiting just outside the Assembly. Senate President Orecchio will introduce, is recognizing Senator Persky, who will possibly be introducing the governor. The governor is standing just outside the Assembly doors.
The governor is arrived.
Will the committee appointed to wait on the governor please escort him to the podium?
Governor Kean now making his entrance to deliver a $6.4 billion budget message. The governor of New Jersey, Thomas Kean.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor of the State of New Jersey, Thomas H. Kean.
Speaker Karcher, President Orecchio, men and women of the New Jersey State Legislature. It's going to take me a minute, and if I could depart from what I wrote. That welcome and being here in this chamber is something that has caught me a little bit right now. This was my home, as you know, for 10 years, and some of the best friends I have in this life were made in this chamber, on both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats. And I remember sitting very well where John Doyle is sitting, and where Dean Gallo is sitting, and even up where Ellen Karcher is sitting. And sat and listened to many impressive moments. I'm told, I was told this morning that I've appointed more legislators and ex-legislators to positions in the state administration than any other New Jersey governor in history. If I've done that, it is, believe me, simply an additional sign of the very deep respect that I hold for the members of this legislature. I remember sitting and listening to Dick Hughes talk about needs in our urban areas, and Bill Cahill talk about environmental protection, and Brendan Byrne talk over and over again about tax reform. And as I sat there and listened, those were very, very important messages. But no message, I don't believe, was any more important or could be more important for the state than the one in which I bring you today. The budget I submit to you today not only deals with the harsh present, but points New Jersey in a direction toward a brighter future. The difficult times in which we live demand a new and different approach. Our response to that demand will be the basis in which the people of the state are going to judge us all, every one of us. I'm committed to turning this state, to turning New Jersey in a different direction, to break the traditional philosophy of the past and to set a new course. Early in February, it became very obvious to us of the emerging problem. What we found, as you know, was a shortfall of $527 million, a sum which would be necessary, simply necessary, just to keep government services functioning at minimum levels. And we had many evenings, believe me, sitting and pondering over that budget and decisions that have to be made and the best directions to go. And I remember once sitting there shortly before I had to go out and give a speech on Lincoln's Day and thinking about a story that he used to tell about the time, and he told us in the midst of the Civil War when there were problems on every side and his budget didn't know whether he was going to have the money even to fight that war. And he used to tell the story about the time he and a young friend were walking one night, in a very clear night. And as they were walking along, all of a sudden there was the most tremendous shower of meteors that came down from the sky, and his young friend was scared, and he fell down, and he said, and he was worried. And Lincoln said, I turned to him and I said, don't look at the shooting stars, don't look at the meteors. Look above them, look through the clear night. Look at the fixed stars, because it's from those fixed stars that we can set a course. And thinking about that statement, and thinking about that direction, we tried to set a fixed course in this budget and talk about problems that were not temporary, but problems which were permanent. And we made certain decisions. And the first decision I made is I would not turn to the use of fiscal gimmickry to close this shortfall. I refused to look for formula changes, collection accelerations, tax revenue date changes, and the like. Such actions in the past several years were largely responsible for the chaotic condition that the state budget is in the way we found it. In other words, it would be wrong, and I would not mortgage the future to satisfy the needs of the present. Secondly, I directed that this budget deal not only with our present problem, and our present problem is that shortfall, but to look to the future of our state and address long neglected problems. The budget, then, that I submit to you today is more than a series of numbers simply designed for our fiscal survival for 1 year. Rather, it's a document which calls for a fundamental change in direction and a development of new policies, which I hope, as the years go by, will drive that annual budget crisis out of our vocabularies. The first thing we tried to do, the very first step, was to reverse the trend toward an ever-growing government, to exert a firmer hand over the size and scope of that government. The growth of government has been more rapid than any other industry in our state. It has continually reached out for new functions, new areas in which to involve itself, and of course, continually more money to finance those ventures. The working men and women of New Jersey and their families are struggling to maintain fiscal stability in their own households. And it is my firm conviction that we in government must set an example by restoring and maintaining fiscal stability and responsibility in our own household. As a first step toward that end, we reduced departmental spending requests by more than $475 million. We looked at each request individually, and they made exceedingly difficult choices. department after department made strong justification of their requests and submitted impressive documentation on their behalf. Nevertheless, those reductions were ordered. Secondly, we have used the document that you have here before you to make an unprecedented $45 million slash in the government salary accounts. In these days, governments, like families, must get along with less. I know how difficult this is, but I believe it must be done. Primarily through the use of attrition, this budget aims for the first actual decrease in the number of state employees in modern history. We must, I believe, stop the uncontrolled growth of government. This budget tries to do that job. It does not merely require sacrifice, it demands it. The budget also tackles this state's #1 problem, the creation of jobs. It turns away from the past and rejects once and for all the idea of no growth. It takes seriously the promises of both Democratic and Republican platforms. All of us, every one of us in this room, Republicans and Democrats, ran on platforms promising to create and retain jobs. This budget aims to fulfill those promises. The philosophy inherent in this budget is optimistic. It believes that New Jersey has the potential and the capacity to grow. It believes that we can reverse the declines of the last 2 decades. It believes that we can eliminate New Jersey's bad reputation, a reputation as a government which does not encourage or work with those who wish to create jobs. The first element of our economic program then involves tax reform. The net worth tax has been and is a bad and regressive tax. It discriminates particularly against the cities and against older manufacturing plants. The steps I am recommending will start the state in the path that will eliminate this punishing, anti-growth, anti-job tax once and for all. For those who would attack this move, who would substitute rhetoric for reason, I would remind you that by taking the steps I have recommended, we can eliminate the tax completely for over 100,000 small businesses in this state who are struggling simply to stay alive in this time of recession. And we can protect the jobs of hundreds of thousands who work for these small businesses. Secondly, I am recommending that our corporate income tax be reduced to 8.5%. Recent studies by our own Economic Development Council show clearly that such a move can promote jobs and growth. New Jersey will then have, if you follow this recommendation, the lowest tax in our region. This fact, as well as most importantly the fact that we are for the first time lowering some taxes rather than raising them, will give a powerful tool to those from labor, business, and government whose job it is to go out and sell New Jersey and to create those additional jobs. I believe firmly that to delay this program of tax relief will seriously delay New Jersey's economic recovery and cost our citizens those needed jobs. The second major element of my economic recovery program involves transportation. Before we move on to the future, we must rectify the failures of the past. Once, we in New Jersey, and not too many years ago, were proud of our transportation network. We had, you will remember, the best roads in the entire United States. At that time, transportation took over 20% of our budget. Last year, it took less than 5%. In the 1960s and 70s, New Jersey's once proud network of roads and bridges suffered scandalous neglect. Our citizens have suffered inconvenience, and businesses looking for a safe and adequate road network have gone to other states. In addition, Millions of federal dollars have gone elsewhere, simply because New Jersey could not supply the necessary matching funds to the federal government. There were those who advised me to allow this situation to continue for one more year, so that I could come before you today and say that this budget was balanced without the need for major new revenue sources. I rejected that advice. New Jersey can wait no longer. To do so will mean the closing of major bridges and roads. It will also mean that fares on our buses and trains will have to double over the next few years simply to maintain declining service. This would, of course, drive even more people onto our deteriorating system of roads. This must not be allowed to occur. I am therefore recommending to you that the sales tax be extended to motor fuels and that the proceeds be dedicated exclusively to transportation needs, together with 5/8 of existing motor fuel taxes. The written message that you have, which I hope you'll read at some point, details the ways in which I suggest that these monies be spent. But let me note a few highlights. First, these monies will generate an additional $140 to $150 million in federal funds, which can then be spent to put people to work in New Jersey. Secondly, I've recommended that $40 million be set aside on an annual basis to be sent directly back to local governments so that they too can meet their backlog of road needs. I recognize that this recommendation is the most controversial one in this new budget, but I honestly believe that the public will be supportive. The average motorist in this state will pay between $30 and $40 a year. For this, they will be guaranteed an adequate and stable system of transportation. It's the cost, if you look at it this way, of one meal out with the family, or as someone in my office put it, the cost of an hour's work on your car after you hit one of those potholes. Without this program, it's going to be much more difficult to attract jobs to our state. I am confident that the public will support us in this action, and therefore I'm inviting today the legislature to place the final decision in their hands at the ballot box this fall. I'm also pleased today to submit a recommendation for $200,000 to create a Governor's Commission on Science and Technology to be included within the Department of Higher Education. It will serve as a direct link between our education system and the business community to attract high technology industries to our state. Our state, with its great universities and laboratories, has the potential to attract many of the new technology industries, as long as we make the effort. Finally, on the subject of job development, let me mention one other area of vital concern. I have increased substantially the state funds spent for the development of tourism. I have done so for two reasons. First, and most obviously, we hope to attract more tourists to spend their dollars in New Jersey to help our economy. I believe firmly that every dollar spent on tourism brings back 4 or 5 from out of state. Secondly, and just as importantly, our new campaign will talk about the good things in our state. For too long, our state has had a poor and unfair image. This image has hurt our pride, and it's also cost us jobs. We have, in reality, the best beaches in the eastern seaboard, lovely mountains in the northwest, and a deep and rich history that surpasses any New England state. This budget allows us to tell the truth about our state and at least match the tourism expenditures of our neighbors. As you also know, there is a major increase in the budget in the area of corrections. It is not only necessary, but unavoidable. You have passed in recent years increasingly tough penalties for criminals in our state. I commend you for that. Criminals, particularly violent criminals, must be removed from our streets. But you have not provided the places to put them. Our state problems have been passed down to the counties, and in some cases, even to our municipal jails. Go as I have to jails in counties like Essex, Passaic, and Camden, and you will see the results of our neglect. This budget provides us with the money to start to rectify this problem and place state prisoners into state custody where they rightfully belong. The largest increase by far in this budget goes to public education. The money I have recommended is the largest single increase since the thorough and efficient law was passed. I would remind you that state aid to education now comprises approximately 30% of our entire state budget, and it is growing at a more rapid rate than the budget as a whole. In this regard, it might be worthwhile for your education committees to review the current education formulas to ensure that state monies are being spent in line with your wishes and additionally in line with constitutional mandates. If there is one area of the budget that particularly disappoints me, it is in the area of higher education. While I have been able in this budget to increase money for scholarships, the overall budget for higher education is, in my opinion, simply too low. If in your deliberations you can find additional revenues, I would suggest that higher education is an appropriate place to put them. There are additional areas of the budget, however, which should be highlighted. In the area of help for senior citizens, we are pleased to recommend increases in both the Pharmaceutical Assistance Program for the aged and disabled and the Lifeline Program to help the aged and needy with their utility bills. In addition, we are restoring $50 million taken away from the casino revenue funds last year and diverted to other programs. There remains some $13 million. If the Appropriations Committee wishes to remove these remaining funds, I will welcome the move. If not, I will remove them as soon as fiscal conditions permit. This budget continues the trend toward increasing aid for local government. This year's overall figure is up almost 8% over a year ago. In that regard, we should note that state aid to local government now represents 56% of our state budget. I would also like to note that debt service is rising at too rapid a rate. We cannot continue to mortgage our children's future in this state. We have therefore recommended a return to pay-as-you-go capital in certain limited areas. Our cities and those who live in them, especially the poor, must always be in our minds. And I have therefore recommended a full restoration of the federal cuts in the Medicaid program and in mass transportation. For the protection of those who walk the streets of our cities, I am recommending a major increase in the funding of the Safe and Clean Streets program. If enacted, this program should ensure just under 1,000 policemen patrolling the streets of our cities. For those who we call, for lack of a better word, the working poor, struggling to stay off welfare, I am recommending a broad new program so that they can continue in the dignity of work and still earn enough to provide for their families and take part in the hopes that we should all share in, the hopes of our American dream. And finally, at the particular urging of Mayor Primus of Camden, I am recommending increased funding for the Neighborhood Preservation Program. If we are to bring back our cities, we must help them to preserve neighborhoods. Mayor Primus informs me that in Camden, every dollar spent in this program brings in 3 or 4 from the private sector. I believe it and recommend this program to you unreservedly. This, then, is our budget. If passed, it will take our state in a whole new direction. First, it will effectively end the unparalleled growth in state government. Government in these times will have to perform our vital services with fewer, not more, state employees. Secondly, it reverses our anti-business, anti-job, anti-growth attitudes of the past. This budget is frankly and proudly designed to attract and to keep jobs in our state. Third, it attempts to address the mistakes of the past by providing an adequate and stable source of funding for transportation and to provide space to keep our hardened criminals off the streets and away from innocent citizens. And finally, it attempts to use state-funded programs for a variety of human needs, from those of senior citizens to those of the working poor. I recognize and fully understand, having sat in this body, that nobody in this room is going to approve of every proposal that I've made. As a whole, however, I believe that this budget represents a sensible approach to the very difficult times in which we all live. It's now up to you. It's very easy to carp at particular points or to simply oppose for opposition's own sake. That, however, is not enough. It's never been enough, not in this state and not in these times. I challenge you. I challenge you here and now to do more, to present alternatives. I recognize this isn't easy. Either you have to cut programs or find additional taxes. But I would repeat now to you that this budget is not inviolate. It's not chiseled in stone. It's not impervious to change. However, change and responsibility must remain interlocked. To accept change is to accept responsibility. That is your challenge. That is your task. I will do everything in my power to help you meet that challenge. You know, this year we are celebrating the 100th year since the birth of a great president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1945, when FDR died in Warm Springs, Georgia, he was posing for a portrait and working in the draft of a speech he expected to give later in that week. Unfortunately, only a very few fragments of that speech remain. But there's one that I've always liked, because that last speech he ever wrote concluded with, "The only limit to our realization of tomorrow is our doubts of today." There are no limits to our opportunities in this state. The future is truly limitless for those of us here in New Jersey. Let us work together. Thank you very much.
And so Governor Thomas Kean concludes his first budget message to the New Jersey legislature. To briefly summarize, the beginning, Kean received 2 standing ovations as he walked into the Assembly chambers here, something that he said moved him and reminded him of his days when he was a legislator. Down on the floor right now, the motions are being heard to recess this joint session.
All in favor, say aye. This session of the 200th legislature is now adjourned.
As you heard, the joint session is now adjourned. Some other points of the governor's message today. He said his new budget points New Jersey in a new direction. He said when he came into office, his administration found a $527 million shortfall in funds, and they're trying to fix a tight course in taking care of the problems that face New Jersey. They want to have solutions to the budgetary problems that are not merely momentary, but something that will go in the long run and last in the long run. He says he wants to reverse the trend of an ever-growing state government. He said we must maintain fiscal responsibility in our own house. To do so, Kean said his administration has reduced departmental spending by $427 million. He said they made a $45 million slash in government salaries. This would be done by reducing the number of state employees, hopefully, said Kean, by attrition, although earlier this week staff aides said it could come with some layoffs, although not many are anticipated. Kean also said his new budget aims to create jobs, and to do that, Kean says he's calling for some tax reforms. He would like the eventual elimination of the network tax. Immediately, he is calling for a reduction from 9% to 8.5% of the corporate income tax. This, said Kean, would create jobs. Kean also said the state's transportation system is in bad shape. He said last year only 5% of the state budget went to transportation. And this has got to change because the state is losing business coming into New Jersey because of its poor transportation system. Said Kean, New Jersey can wait no longer to fix the transportation system, and he recommended to fix the transportation system, extending the sales tax, the 5% sales tax, to motor fuels. This would generate an estimated $200 million. He said he would ask for $140 million to be spent on construction for new roads and railways. $40 million would also go to local governments. He said the cost per motorist in the state would be $30 or $40 per year, and he said this is something that the motorists of New Jersey would gladly pay for. He's also calling for a $200,000 commission to be set up on science and technology. This would be a governor's commission, and it is designed to try and bring high-tech technology industries to New Jersey. And he also wants to get a new public relations program going for New Jersey, something that would stress the positive about the Garden State. He also called for a major budget increase in the corrections. He says the legislators have passed tougher laws for criminals. Now we have to have a place to put them. He said the additional monies for corrections would go for new prisons. He said the largest increase in the budget is going to public education, something that many educators will probably disagree with because the budget also eliminates $65 million from recommended increases that the Department of Education had asked for. Kean did say overall the budget for higher education is too low, and he suggested to the legislators that if they can find additional funds, they should put them into higher education. He also said there will be increases in aid for the elderly, and there will be increases in aid for local government. He said the state needs to return to the pay-as-you-go capital system, and he called for a full restoration of the federal cuts in Medicaid and mass transportation. He also called for money for the Safe and Clean Neighborhood program, and that would put 1,000 new police officers on the street. Summing up, he said his budget would hold the growth on state government, reverse an anti-business trend, address mistakes of the past regarding transportation and prisons, and address the problems of senior citizens and the elderly. And finally, Governor Kean called on the legislators to help him with his budget program. He said his new budget is not written in stone. He says if they can find changes, then go ahead, but they must be ready to accept responsibility for those changes. Tonight at 8:30, the New Jersey Network will present a special hour-long broadcast on the governor's message. Until then, I'm Larry Stupnagel. Good afternoon.